I had folks that worked for our companies that were dependent on us. So we had to make a lot of really hard decisions, such as, do we make payroll or do we pay our mortgage? And we made the really hard decision of making payroll. Me and my wife and my kids had to go through a lot of sacrifice over those coming years. So that was quite an interruption, but I'll tell you, it wasn't easy. It was excruciating at times, but some of the things that we all learned along the way are invaluable.
Has your life, your dreams been interrupted? Good news. It is possible to reinvent our lives. People are doing it every day, and some are brave enough to share the struggles, disappointments, and challenges. If you are looking for a new beginning, a do-over, or to rediscover your passion, maybe even find a new one, then grab a cup of coffee and let's talk. Interrupted, Act 2, Reinventing Your Legacy, with your host, Coach Lori.
Corey Nathan is the host of Talkin Politics, Without Killin Each Other. Very needed in this day and age. Welcome, Corey.
Thanks so much for having me, Lori. It's great to be with you.
It's so fun to have a podcast host on. And you and I actually really do the same thing. We're both podcast hosts and we teach podcasting. Yes. And so I really look forward to this conversation as we progress. But let's start with what you're doing now and what you love about it.
I fell in love with podcasting from the very first episode I ever listened to. It took me a while to get on there because until recently, I didn't have an iPhone. So being a Samsung guy or an Android guy, it was harder for me to get podcasts. But in the fall of 2018, I listened to a podcast just like what you're doing, having wonderful conversations, engaging other people on interesting topics. What you do, Coach Lori, you do it in such a way where the episodes I've listened to, I felt like I was in the room with you. I felt like I was at the table with you and your guest. And that's podcasting at its best. And I got that the very first, it was a Mark Maron episode, really long interview. I forgot who the guest was, but I fell in love right away. I don't know if that answers, but I fell in love right away. And literally within 6 months, we were producing our first podcast, an entertainment industry show. And I never looked back. It was that interruption maybe that I needed or was looking for or was hungry for. And I've just never looked back from 2018 since.
What's so beautiful about that is interruptions are hard. They suck and we hate them. But I can't tell you how many people are like so grateful for them afterwards. There are some interruptions, deaths, things that are just so painful. But when good things can come of them, it's so amazing. So tell us about your interruption, because it was kind of long and drawn out.
Yeah, there have been a few interruptions, frankly. The first big one that I can remember was more of a theological existential crisis that I had in my late 20s. And I grew up, we don't have to get into the religious discussion, but just my own story includes a big evolution, if you will. I grew up in a very observant Jewish family, went to an Orthodox synagogue, and I became a Christian in my late 20s. So that was a big interruption, not just for me, but for my family, as you can imagine. And then professionally, financially, we had a huge interruption, as did much of the country, much of the world around 2008. We were doing pretty well financially in the early 2000s. But when you're a boat or a little tugboat on a whole ocean that's going through these ups and downs, there's really only so much you can do. So the long story short on that one is that over the course of the next 5 to 7 years, we ended up losing our home. We did the best of a lot of bad options, which was a short sale of our family home when our kids were in their formative years. We had business interests, and I had folks that worked for our companies that were dependent on us. So we had to make a lot of really hard decisions, such as, do we make payroll or do we pay our mortgage? And we made the really hard decision of making payroll. Our guys were grateful to hold on to their jobs during some rough waters in the late, 2009, 2010, those years. But it meant that me and my wife and my kids had to go through a lot of sacrifice over those coming years. So that was quite an interruption. But I'll tell you, it wasn't easy. It was excruciating at times. But some of the things that we all learned along the way are invaluable.
What I love about when I was reading about you was my sister's and her husband owned a business, and same thing. Their employees, they wanted to pay them, and that was a horrible time for people in any kind of building industry. And when I saw that you made that decision of taking care of your people, and I know how hard that is, and it speaks to integrity, but also something else, which is, in a way, it's faith that this isn't the end. Maybe there will be something on the other side of this horrendous happening. Did that come into play for you as you were like hoping that things would get better?
Yeah. What comes to mind, I was writing in a journal every day at that point. I started keeping that journal in March of 2007. And I remember wondering what my great-grandfather, Chaim Rubin, was going through in the early 1900s. My father's side of the family is from what's now called Chernihiv, Ukraine. At the time, it was part of the Russian Empire. That family, from what we can gather from shtetls, Jewish shtetls that were there, what we can gather is they had been there for at least 800, if not 1,000 years. But Chaim Rubin, who my father is actually named after, lived through World War I, Grums, the Bolshevik Revolution. And my grandmother, she lived into her 90s, so I got to hear these stories. And one of the things that she said, only half jokingly, was, there were the Bolsheviks, and there was the Tsar's army, and then there were the Cossacks that came through our town, and they all fought with each other. But the one thing they all agreed on is they all hated the Jews. So that she wasn't entirely joking, because that's ultimately why after 800 years, the Blicks and the Kravals had to move from their family home and go to this place called America that, they had maybe a cousin that arrived early or a friend. They had heard about it, but starting from a place of prosperity. One of my great uncles was the mayor of Chernihiv. They had businesses. They were well established there. To start from scratch, to leave everything and to start from scratch. That's what I was thinking of. I wish that my great grandfather kept journals. I would have learned Yiddish to have read them. But thinking about my great grandfather and thinking, man, if Chaim Rubin and Chana, who I'm named after, his wife, could get through the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, and the pogroms, we can get through losing our home.
Oh, wow. What comes to mind for me is that's the power of podcasting. You wish your grandpa left a journal. I wished my grandma, she did leave journals, but they were lost somewhere. And she was a single mom way back in the 20s. And I was a single mom, and to be able to look back at what it was like for her.
Yeah.
And that's what I love so much about podcasting is its legacy. And my career has been in radio, and I love radio. And radio is legacy in a way, but you do your shift and it's gone. There's a new person, a new day. Every day's a new day. With podcasting, we're telling our stories, even bits and pieces, and it lives on forever. And I think about how our kids aren't interested in things at a certain age. There comes a point where they're like, wow, tell me the stories. And if mom and dad are gone, so are the stories. If we don't leave that legacy, if we don't find a way to write or speak. And when I teach podcasting, I say, you may not want a podcast, but tell the stories and leave them on your phone.
Yeah.
So when you're gone and they hang on to your phone and they find a story you told about your family, that is gold.
The other great thing about podcasting is you can be found from anywhere around the world.
Yes.
Well, I have family in Israel now, extended family in Israel. So especially once COVID happened, we were able to stay in much better touch than we'd ever been able to stay in before. And then once the war started in October a few years ago, October 7th happened. We're talking to them on a very, in fact, we have several letters. Last night was the first night of Passover as we're recording this. So it's just so nice that they can find these stories and they can tell their stories too. I've had my young cousins who served, and it's so interesting. Not to get into the politics of it. It's so interesting when a lot of us have these political opinions, but what podcasting does really well is you can't afford one-dimensionality. You can't afford caricatures. When you hear the human story, all of a sudden you hear, oh, my cousin grew up with Palestinians. and they played soccer with Palestinian friends. It's not as simple as they're the good guys, they're the bad guys. These are human beings that are all going through their own stories. So yeah, to your point, it's a really wonderful thing.
And to be able to give perspective, like just a little bit of history about your family. How amazing is that when we look back on, you're thinking, if they made it, I can make it. Like that is hope. And that's what, it brings us courage, I guess, to keep going sometimes, because we think about the Great Depression and we know a lot of people couldn't see a future.
Yeah.
And they took their lives, and that's just so heartbreaking. But that there's always a next. The fact that you fell in love with podcasting and you just made it happen, because as a teacher, you probably run into this where people are like, oh yeah, I've thought about it. They've thought about it for 10 years. Do you know how many episodes you would have right now? Over 500 if you would have just pushed record, because we learn, right? We learn as we go. And I think that that's hard for people to just do things and do them messy and get better as we go. But like when I think about radio and oh my goodness, my first air checks, I actually threw them away when I found them. I didn't want my kids to ever hear those. But then later I was like, I probably should have, so they could go, oh, she got better.
Yeah. What were those first air checks like, Lori?
Like the inflection wasn't quite right. Introduced so one of the criticisms I got, so the song Jump by
oh sure, yeah, by Van Halen. Yeah, 1984.
So I was like, here's Jump, Van Halen. And he's like, why didn't you say Jump? It's just like because on TV and video, you can see it. But radio, we have to portray it. And that's what I love about podcasting. We're telling a story. So one of my favorite things is baseball on radio. Why? Because they have to paint the picture. And they have to work hard at doing it.
Oh man, you're singing my song now, because I grew up in New York as a Mets fan, and I got to listen to Bob Murphy and then Howie Rose, and I moved to LA a bunch of years ago, and I got to listen to Vin Scully. Talk about storytellers. They could paint a picture. A lot of times I would turn off the sound on the TV and just listen to Vin Scully or Howie Rose. They're just so good at what they do. And now as a podcaster, I find myself taking notes and learning from them, learning from other interviewers. Terry Gross, I take notes when I listen to an interview. So it's a wonderful medium. It's a wonderful art form. And I've just fallen in love with it.
What I hear from you is learning as you go, because one of the things that, and sometimes this happens in radio too, is people get the gig and they're like, I'm golden, but I want to keep improving. My biggest goal because I'm still on the radio part-time, is I want people in their car to answer me out loud. If I say something that makes them respond out loud, I've done my job. Now, I'll never know that, but that's my hope, because if I can be in this little studio and make somebody else feel seen and heard, then I've nailed it. Yes. Because that's what I feel like right now is so important, is people, they're kind of going, see me. And if we can just lean in and talk to one person and basically say without saying, I see you, then they can find more purpose in their life.
Absolutely. There's a couple things I take from what you just said. One is we're constantly working on our craft. We take it very seriously. There's a story about Al Pacino. I'm pretty sure it was after he was in Godfather 1 and 2. He went back to the New York theater and he was in a play called Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie? And he played that for at least a year, because even at that time, he didn't do many interviews. But at the 1 year when they opened the play, he did an interview, and one of the questions was, so how's it going? At that point you do 8 performances a week, and he's worked on his craft and all the rehearsal, and his answer was, yeah, I think I'm starting to get it. After a year, 8 performances a week, I think I'm starting to get it. It's someone who's committed to working on his craft and creating that role. Same thing here. Some of the best virtuosos in podcasting, in music, in art, they're constantly working on their craft. But also, it's not about how I look. It's not about how I sound. It's about what we're able to share with others who are participating in the conversation. So my brother, we have another program we do called East Meets West Sports. And sometimes my brother will be texting me in the middle of when he's listening. What are you, crazy? No, that's, he's having react. I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of what we want to do, is we want to elicit a reaction, but also it's about what we're doing together as a shared experience. Do you sense that as well?
Yeah, I love that you said that, because so often people will say, well, who's going to listen? And I'm like, it's not about you. Yes, you're speaking, but it's really about, if our experience is going to change a life, then it's about whoever's listening. And that's not really our job. People find us, which is amazing. Podcasting is found so different than anything else by SEO, but that it really is about them, not us, but the we. And I love that, because sitting alone in a studio sometimes can be daunting. And especially in radio, when you're doing it, at COVID, like halfway through my shift, all the lights in the house went out because nobody was there. And I'm still having a party, trying to make everybody feel important and part of the thing.
Right.
And that, to me, I think is something that is missed sometimes by podcasters, because they didn't have like Radio 101. You're talking to one person because they don't know it. They don't know what they don't know. And so if I can bring that in and teach people that, and they can have more of a conversation than telling, I'm going to tell you.
Right.
Does that feel like the difference? To me, that feels like the difference.
I think so. A lot of the best podcasts, it's not to say that you couldn't have someone doing a soliloquy and doing a lecture kind of a thing, because there are some folks who are really good at that. Stand-up comedians are up there as a solo act, and they're really good at that. But I think the best ones are doing what you're saying. They're playing a role within a larger context of the we, like you said. And they're also, even stand-up comedians, there's something broken in the world that they're trying to figure out and even trying to fix in their own way. And that's what we're trying to do. In Hebrew, there's a concept called tikkun olam, heal the world. Part of what we have to do is diagnose what the heck is wrong, in order to solve it. So that's what I love. That's what I love about this medium and the politics show that you mentioned. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people talk about hard things with each other across our differences. That's what we figured out is one of the main problems. It's not a particular piece of legislation. It's not a particular politician that we support. It's not about hating somebody, which is there's plenty of people who are, anger entrepreneurs and rage, they're good at manufacturing rage. There's plenty of people doing that. We're doing just the opposite. We want to take some space back for those of us, and it's a lot of us, a vast majority of us, who want to be able to see our neighbor, walking down the driveway, taking out the trash. Hey, buddy, as opposed to seeing somebody who wears a different color hat than I do, or having Uncle Stan over at Thanksgiving and not wanting to pour the mashed potatoes over his head. You know what I mean?
Yes. What has been, like you say, you're having hard conversations. What's been one of your hardest conversations? So
the first one that comes to mind, it's both the hardest as well as the most meaningful. I had a conversation with one of my favorite writers, a fellow named David Brooks. He used to write for New York Times, and now he's with The Atlantic and teaches. And David, so David's last book is How to Know a Person, but the book before that is really relevant to this program. It's The Second Mountain. If you haven't read The Second Mountain, it's exactly what you're working on. And when I saw your show, I said, "Oh, baby," I just assumed you're doing a lot of the same work that David talks about. I'll get to my conversation with David in a second, but just so you know, what that book is about, it's about a lot of folks who achieve something in the first part of their life, achieve vocationally or professional athletes or whatever, in marriage or money or all kinds of things, right? When we're in our late teens, early 20s, we think, oh, I want to make a lot of money. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I want to get a title. I want to, rule the world. And a lot of us achieve something. But then if you've lived long enough, you get a gray hair or two. and there's something that happens that you end up tumbling off that mountain. It's a health event. It's a divorce. It's a death in the family. It's a financial calamity. Any number of things can knock you off that mountain. But a lot of us, it's not like we lost those talents and those drives and those virtues. So we're at the bottom of the mountain. Are we going to climb another mountain? And if so, what is it that we're going to be bringing on that climb? Are we going to, and when we get to the top, whatever that top looks like, it's a different victory that we're seeking, a victory that has more virtue, maybe a little less of the vanity, maybe a little less of the greed and the vices that drove us, that were the fuel for the first mountain that we climbed. Long way around the barn is saying that's David's book, The Second Mountain. I happened to be reading it about the same time when I entered into podcasting, so it was very formative for me. His next book that came out, I want to say in the fall of 2023, How to Know a Person. So David came on the show about a month after the book came out. And I don't know about you, it looks like you do the same thing that I do, where I have like literally a dozen pages of notes for every interview I go into, and I get to all of like 2 questions, and we just have the conversation.
Let me guess, you've been thinking about starting a podcast for what, a year now? Meanwhile, people with half your experience are out there becoming the authority online just because they hit record. And that's why I created Podcraft. It's the membership for women who know they have something worth saying, but want help with the tools, the tech, the strategy, and what actually to say, and maybe even how to say it. You get podcast tools, coaching, twice monthly office hours with me, Lori Hardy, because it's really not about you being seen, but it's about your story having an impact. Let's just stop overthinking it and start podcasting.
And I don't know about you, it looks like you do the same thing that I do, where I have like literally a dozen pages of notes for every interview I go into, and I get to all of like 2 questions, and we just have the conversation. So one of my notes was about a chapter that he wrote about his childhood friend, Pete, that he was still very close with. Pete struggled with mental illness, especially in his adult life, and tragically succumbed to it in early 2023. And David shared that it was very hard for him to share that. So I had a note in my in the interview notes to thank David for the chapter on Pete, and then in big bold red letters I said, don't talk about it, because at the time I was going through therapy and analysis to understand some of my own proclivities. I subsequently was diagnosed bipolar 2. I hadn't gotten the diagnosis yet, but I was getting close to understanding my own mental makeup a little bit better. And that's why it was such a sore subject. So I got to that point in the interview, and I said, David, that was it was so emotionally generous of you to share your experiences with your friend Pete. Thank you. And I was about to ask the next question, and David, he goes, that looks like that really touched you. Tell me about that. And Coach Lori, I cried my eyes out. He asked the question, and in the middle of the recording, I was boo-hooing like a big old baby. But he was so gracious. I collected, I had to pause because it was a little bit too much for the recording. I paused, and David sat with me, and it was a really touching moment. But it was part of that. It wasn't just that conversation. The fact that I was talking to somebody whose work has had such a deep impact on my life, and also somebody happens to have gone through a similar experience as I did. He grew up observantly Jewish, became a Christian in his adult life. So it was a very meaningful person as well as a meaningful conversation. But I was going through that process of what I learned was, okay, here's a diagnosis to help you understand the challenges that you've gone through your whole life. And then I was able to start to develop a vocabulary and a set of tools to stay within healthier ranges. So as hard as that was, and frankly, as embarrassing as it was, for me, in that moment, I think it's the one recording, even though I didn't share the part where I was full on boohoo, and people could tell that I was having trouble. And even after we hit record again, I felt like I was still kind of brittle, emotionally speaking. It's the one episode that people refer to the most from that program. So.
Wow. And that speaks to vulnerability.
I hadn't thought of it that way. And I could tell in the tone of your voice that that's a good thing. It's a scary thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. I'm just going to say it's a scary thing.
It's scary. And we don't want people to know that about us. If we want an award, we could be humble and vulnerable. But when we're boo-hooing over something that we've really experienced, that's hard. And I love that, because you said that in when I was reading about you, it said having the hard conversations.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people say they're doing that, but they're just relying on their anger or their rage. They're not really open to looking at both sides and having an actual conversation. I think that's epic right now in our society and the way the world is going, because it's the only way that we can express love.
Yeah. Well, also doing love, not just express love, but doing love. And what I mean by that is in those moments, in those conversations, because of what a lot of us watch and what we're scrolling on the digital socials, we're doing different sorts of exercises. And the exercise, we're training ourselves to reflexively come back with a contentious response. We hear something that we disagree with. It could be, I don't know, I'd really get in the weeds here. In California, there was this thing called Prop 50, redistricting, mid-decade redistricting. I could say, I don't know, I'm not sure about Prop 50. All of a sudden, a lot of people come out of the woodworks and they want to fight about it, as opposed to doing what David did with me. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that? Tell me about that. It should be intuitive, but it's not, because we've trained ourselves to basically play rhetorical ping pong with people at best, or war with people at worst, which is the de facto, the default posture of many of us. But if we could retrain ourselves and exercise curiosity over contentiousness, that's doing love. That's the practice of love.
Exactly. I just spoke with someone who wrote a book, and their whole thing is get curious, not furious.
Yes, I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Good. Curiosity is hard. As a life coach, I worked so hard when I became a coach of really being curious. And I had an example with my son where he made this comment, and I could have taken it as he wasn't happy with our family. But when he explained it, when I got curious and I said, what is it about that? He explained it, and my heart melted, because it just showed how compassionate and generous he was. And that was my lesson in curiosity, is like, that's when it matters, because it's so easy to, we always say assume, but sometimes we just do. We think we know what people are saying. And if we just get curious, we can be really surprised that wasn't at all the way they were going.
Our brains do that audibly as well as visibly. When we read, our eyes don't actually take in every bit, every letter, and it fills in so many of the blanks. The same thing that we do, our imaginations fill in so many of the blanks. So if I know, it sounds like you talked to somebody the other day that voted for Trump or is a Trump supporter. So we then fill in a lot of the blanks. Oh, he must be this and he must be that, and he hates these people, and so we fill in a lot of the blanks. But we can't assume that. Can I ask you a question though, Coach Lori? I'm curious.
Yes.
Being a life coach, life is a big deal. I'm curious about all of the different modalities and all the different disciplines that you have to be a student of in order to be the kind, because I hear how good you are at, or how personable, how custom there's so many things that you do so well. What are the different disciplines and modalities that you have to be fluent in order to be effective at what you do?
That is such a great question, because what I love about coaching is I'm not the expert. The person I'm coaching is the expert. All I'm doing is trying to access what they really know, because how many times have we said, well, deep down I knew, but we didn't rely on that. We did what we should.
Right.
But sometimes when people tell a story and they go, but deep down. And so that's what, as a coach, what I try to do. What is your deep down? Because so often people will be like, well, I'm good at singing, I'm going to be a singer, but it's not what it's not. And I'm not saying go and just live your dream, which I think is overrated a little bit, because we have to make a living, but also there's such push and pull with that. And so it's like, you're the expert. Okay, this is one of my favorite stories when I became a coach.
Okay.
Have you heard of Barbara Scher?
It sounds familiar.
She's like the original coach. I think she wrote like, What Color Is Your Parachute? Not sure. Anyway, she had this client come in. She was a waitress, and she hated her job. She wanted to find her thing. But after the third meeting, she pulled out her checkbook to pay. That's how long ago this was. And Barbara said to her, put that checkbook away. I've never been able to not help someone find something that they love. And so the woman got up, put on her coat, turned around. Well, a book fell out of her coat. And Barbara picks it up, and it's a book about apes.
Oh.
And she says, oh, honey, you turn around, get your checkbook out and sit down. She says, why didn't you tell me you like apes? And this is what she said. Well, everybody loves apes. And what proceeded from that was there was I think it was in California, and there was a rescue where they had brought in chimps or apes, and she got to go volunteer there. And guess what? Because she loved it so much and she knew so much, they hired her to work there and to transport them back to where they had to go.
Oh,
and
that's great.
so it's like, what is in our deep heart is sometimes we just need help accessing it because we don't think it's possible, or we think it's stupid, or we think everybody does it.
Right.
Like sometimes what our easiness is to others would be their brilliance.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love about it. And I learn so much.
You have a lot of millennials and Gen Z listeners who are like, what's a checkbook? What is
right.
But I love the way you describe that, because it reminds me of there are certain martial art forms that aren't about direct hits. They're effective because they're taking the weight of the opponent and using the weight of the opponent to in combat. It's against them, but what you're really doing is the person is already moving in that direction. You're just allowing them to go in the direction that they were already going, which is really the best martial art form is the fight that you never get into. So,
yes.
But for you, for your discipline, for your profession, you're helping people realize the momentum where their body is already going, as opposed to in times of turmoil. I remember during those years, 2008 to 2015, I felt like I was holding so tightly onto something that I was losing sight of everything else around me. This house, and even the idea of us being in this house, and the dreams I had, watching the kids play in the backyard and what we were going to do to the back hill. I was holding so tightly onto an idea and onto things that were driven more by proclivities and vices than by real principles and values, that ultimately I had to just let that go, because the momentum of the world, of what was happening in the economy, was going a certain way. And we discovered other things. We were in between homes at a certain point. We had some adventures in rental homes, and we even had to stay with grandma and grandpa for a week in between one of the rental homes. So by the way, if you ever want to write an incredible sitcom, just spend a week with Ronnie and Phyllis Nathan, my parents, and you'll have plenty of material, especially with my kids in that house. Oh my God. But we had this adventure, and we also, I never would have had the experience of writing that last check to get out of literally 7 figures worth of debt. That last check, it was so symbolic, and I wrote it to a bank that had given us a loan to help us meet payroll. And it was our local bank. So guys I'd meet at the soccer field where my kids were playing soccer. And that last check I wrote, it was important to me. It was significant to me. So I wrote this big old fat check as we did a bunch of other things and sold everything we had, and slowly but surely dug out of literally over $1 million worth of debt. That last check was the Bank of Santa Clarita, which is the name of our hometown or home area. And I wrote it. I walked outside, and I was about to walk outside, and the teller said, "Mr. Nathan." I said, "Wait, well, is my dad here?" He said, "I'm sorry, Corey." And she said, "Could you wait a minute?" And she went in the back office, and she brought out the VP of SBA, like the business VP.
Yeah.
And his name was Craig. And Craig said, hold on a second. He went back and he got the president of the bank. And I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And they both stood with me there and just said, a lot of people would have taken other action and used other mechanisms to get out of this. But this is really meaningful. We really appreciate it. Because the bank, a local bank, was going through hard times too. So the idea that somebody would come and pay off their obligations meant something to them personally, but also meant something to that local bank. So it was so mean. I never would have had that experience. My kids never would have had the challenges of being in one rental home, and, the funny stories of being with grandma and grandpa, and the victory that we felt when we moved into this home in 2018 and were able to get back into a home ownership situation. So meaningful. And you don't get that. You don't get that.
I think often we think of letting go as failure, and you letting go was you're brave because it allowed other doors to open for you.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of people say, well, what was your brave moment? And I think in our bravest moment, we don't feel brave at all. Letting go of everything. But then you took the next step and paid back and look at what it gave back to you.
Yeah, that's right. It's like music. You can compose a song in all major keys, but you won't really hear the major keys unless there are some minor keys in between. There's this painting, I forget the name of the painting, but it's a Velázquez, and it's Christ on the cross. And I think it's in the same room that Las Meninas is in, a famous painting that a lot of folks would recognize if they saw it. But this one, it looks like the Christ character is luminescent. It's oil. It's an oil painting, but it looks like that character is jumping off the canvas. And it's because what I noticed is the blackness of the background was the blackest the blackest black I'd ever seen, which makes the figure that he painted luminescent. And that's what you need. Life needs to be that way sometimes. I don't know if that makes any sense. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, that is a great image. Well, Corey, this has been so amazing. And I still have so many questions. As you say, we just get onto these. But first of all, how can people find you if they want to? I don't know if they want to be on your show or work with you. What are you looking for?
We have some wonderful guests. I love, if folks wanted to listen to the show, but I'm also easy to find. So the easiest way to find our flagship show is www.politicsendreligion.us. politicsendreligion.us. Or if you go to Apple or Spotify, you can type in Politics and Religion, and you'll find our big old purple logo, Talkin Politics and Religion Without Killin Each Other. But you can also find me. I'm easy to find at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials. I especially love Substack these days at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan.
Oh, okay. It's good to hear about Substack. So one thing I want to say before we go.
Wait. Let me pause just for 1 second. Lori, you would be brilliant on Substack. If you don't have one, I want to give you a little push. Just check it out, substack.com, and find some people that will resonate. But the simplest way to put it is people actually read the articles on Substack.
Well, there you go.
And for somebody like you with stories and wisdom and just you're so smart and good-hearted, I think you'll be, whether it's short form like posts or long. I've been sharing essays. You'll be great on. And let me know, because I want to be one of your first followers.
Okay, I will. That's so great. I was working at a radio station that was, one of the stations was more liberal and one was more conservative. They're side by side, and it was during election year. I would be at my editor's desk doing my work, and I would hear a conversation, and in my heart, I'm waiting for the
eruption or something, or yeah.
Yes, I was just waiting for the rage and the anger. And to hear these professionals on two very different platforms have conversations because they loved each other, they worked together, they knew each other. And I remember that feeling of, oh no, here it comes. We're going to have a blowout. And that never happened. There was nothing but respect, even though they held their ground.
Yeah.
They were very good debaters, I guess you would say.
Sure.
And that's why when I heard your title, I thought that was my example of, why can't we just get along? That's the mom in me.
Yeah. Well, it is true. There was this great study done in 2018 by More in Common called Hidden Tribes. And there's going to be a Hidden Tribes 2.0 that comes out very shortly here. But what they discovered is that on the people who lean left and people who lean right, there's only about 6 or 7% on the right who are what we might think of as extreme, like hyper engaged. And there's only about 7 or 8% on the left who are extreme, which means 85% of us are just the majority. We're they call it the exhausted majority. And the fact is, once we get talking and seeing each other beyond just who we think we might have voted for at the top of the last ballot, we get to see each other's humanity. My favorite episode, real quick, is one of my favorite episodes was when I had a fellow named Joe Walsh, who was still a Republican. He became an independent and eventually became a Democrat, but still has very conservative views. But he was a Tea Party activist, just a rabid Second Amendment rights guy. And I had him on with a fellow named Fred Guttenberg, who tragically lost his daughter in the Parkland shooting. In fact, his daughter was born one day to the day that my middle kid was born. But Fred and Joe were on together. They were dear, dear friends, still are. And what they found, they were on other shows. The first couple times, they were brought on to see if they could get into one of those heated debates that you're talking about. But what they found after the second or third time that they were in a green room together is they shared a lot of the same values. They even shared a lot of the same goals. The legislation that they supported was different, but they were connecting on a very, very human level. And that's, I think, ultimate. I'm not saying that we're all going to hold hands and kumbaya and we're going to agree on it. No, we're still going to have disagreements. After all, there are still Yankee fans, and that's just unacceptable to me. But at the end of the day, there's a human connection. A lot of us do want the same things, even if we disagree on how to get there.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. And I agree. If we could be more curious.
Yeah.
And look at that. Well, before we go, what is it you really, really want us to know?
I want everybody to know how awesome you are. How awesome, Coach. Listen to more Interrupted with Coach Lori, and it'll make your life better. I'd love for folks to give it a whirl. Just once. Give it curious over furious. Check yourself when if anyone is feeling that impulse to reply on the social media thread or at the coffee shop or the local pub, you have this perfect comeback for somebody that you really disagree with. Check that and instead say, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Tell me more about that. Monty Guzman's book, I never thought of it that way. Monica Guzman with Braver Angels, brilliant book. It's a how-to guide on how to have these conversations, but it can be summed up in the title. I never thought of it that way. Oh, so when I go into these conversations, I used to rehearse comeback lines so I could score points in the debate or the contest, right? Now I'm rehearsing something different. I'm rehearsing my own disposition. What frame of mind or frame of heart do I need to be in order to arrive at that? I want to arrive at that moment where I say to the person, oh, I never thought of it that way. So what questions do I need to ask to bring this person out of themselves to learn about their story? But it takes work. It takes exercise. It takes practice to ask that question instead of come back with that, with that furious response.
Right. Because like you said, that's the easy road. The hard road is taking that minute. I remember when email first came about, again, dating myself, and people would say, before you send that email, give yourself a minute, because now we had this easy way to respond.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, this is where we're going with such easy response, that if we don't take a minute, we're going to be just in all kinds of trouble. And by the way, what if you're sending it to the wrong person?
I've had a couple of stories. In fact, Phyllis, my mother, has a couple of those stories, but you wish you could jump into your computer and rip it back.
Oops.
Yeah.
I love it. This has been so great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Coach Lori. This was a real pleasure, and I hope it's not the last time. I hope to get to hang out with you again.
Next time on Interrupted.
They teach us to create value. They teach us it's God, family, then business. They teach us about being compassionate. And when you're doing the right thing, the money follows. When I learned about recovery housing, I did it because I am compassionate, because I am in recovery. Everyone's rock bottom is different.
If you love this podcast, here's a big ask. Will you share with your friends and family, subscribe, give us a review, and a 5-star rating so that others looking to reinvent their lives will be able to get the help they're looking for? Thank you in advance.